Okay, in this talk, I will talk about the relationship between COVID-19 and cognition. I will focus specifically on how the pandemic shapes the way we think about the world. In the past 2 years, we initiated the project COVID and Cognitive Science. In this project, we studied two streams of research. The first one is about how the pandemic influences cognitive processing. The second one is about cognitive and personality determinants of mitigation strategies against COVID-19. In this talk, I will focus specifically on the first stream of research, that is how the COVID-19 impact the way we think about the world. The first one, I'd like to introduce my research on how COVID-19 threat influences our time cognition. Specifically about how the new coronavirus disease influences temporal focus and implicit space-time mappings in our minds. Okay, according to conceptual metaphor theory, time is an abstract idea that is constructed with multiple metaphors resulting from our concrete concepts such as space and motion. Indeed, across many languages and cultures, people tend to employ different spatial metaphors to understand and speak about temporal concepts. For example, in English, we say we look forward to the future and we look backward to the past. In these expressions, we conceptualize the future as in front of us and the past as at back. By contrast, Aymara speakers in South America tend to conceptualize the future as behind and the past as in front in their speech and gesture. However, recent evidence has shown that although Moroccan speakers tend to map the future onto a front position and the past as behind them in their speech, the gesture adhere to the past in front pattern, which suggests a striking dissociation between temporal language and temporal thought. So, if language cannot explain how we conceptualize the past and future in our minds, as the linguistic relativity hypothesis suggests, so we may need a new theoretical account to describe how we mentally represent temporal focus and past and future in our mental models. Some researchers proposed a new cultural account of it. According to temporal focus hypothesis, people's front-back mental space-time mappings depend on how they characteristically devote their attention to the past and future. For instance, cross-cultural research has shown that Moroccans who preserve heritage, tradition, and culture were more likely conceptualize the past as in front than Spanish people who place a higher value on scientific progress and economic growth. So, this hypothesis led us to think about how the ongoing pandemic influenced our time cognition. Actually, many scholars have converged on the idea that infectious disease would shift individuals into the more conservative end of the political spectrum. For instance, in a cross-nation study involving 11,501 participants, Taboo found that national parasite stress was positively related to traditional norms and conservatism. Several hypotheses have been proposed to explain why pathogen threats are associated with political conservatism and endorsement of traditional rules and rituals. This include restricted sex, reducing sexually transmitted infections, traditional food preparation techniques, ingredients containing antimicrobial activity against bacterial, and traditional hygiene rules, such as washing hands properly before dressing a wound. So integrating two separate streams of research programs, namely investigating political consequences of parasite stress in social and personality psychology, and research investigating the association between temporal focus and implicit space-time mappings in cognitive psychology. An essential next step of this investigation is to examine whether the unprecedented pandemic will impact individuals' spatial representations of time. Based on this solid theoretical background, along with multiple studies providing empirical evidence that pathogen can increase preferences for social conventions and traditions, we propose that activating thinking about the coronavirus disease will promote people's past-oriented thinking and increase their responses of past-in-front mapping in their mental models. So we first randomly assigned participants to one of conditions. One is about the priming condition and the other is a neutral condition. And we asked them to read two newspaper articles with approximately 300 words. In the control condition, there were two newspapers articles, sports news. In the experimental condition, there were one newspaper articles, also the same as the one in the neutral condition, the sports news, and one newspaper article about the COVID-19 pandemic. These press reports are neutral in terms of temporality to avoid the influence of the tense or aspect expressions on people's time cognition. So, for instance, the sports news is about the balance between athletes and commercial rights, and the news on the global pandemics about the disease, basics, prevention, and treatment. Two single choice questions were used as the attention check, such as the first new press report is about, we ask them some questions about the content of each newspaper. Okay, to confirm that participants indeed read our reports carefully. So as manipulation check, participants reported how they thought about the influence of the COVID-19 on a 5 Likert point scale, ranging from 1 equals not at all to 5 equals very, very severe. So next, we ask them to complete a time diagram task. In that paradigm, participants saw a cartoon character in the center of the questionnaire sheet between two empty boxes, one ahead of the character and the other behind him. They read that the character went to visit a friend who likes plants yesterday and would be going to visit another friend who likes animals tomorrow. So as the plants and animals were counterbalanced between yesterday and tomorrow across subjects. Participants were asked to assign plants and animals which represent the conceptions of past and future events respectively into boxes in front and back of the character. So our results showed that in line with our predictions, the sagittal space-time mapping significantly differed between the experimental and control groups. The majority of participants in the experimental condition, that is, they were primed with COVID-19, they tend to respond according to the past in front mapping, placing the entity representing the past in front of the character. However, participants in the control condition showed no significant difference in preference between past in front mapping and future in front mapping. Participants in the experimental condition also showed strong agreement with past focus statements. This is because they may face a greater national parasite stress than those in the neutral conditions, as we reviewed earlier. And based on these findings, we found that the COVID-19 disease indeed influenced our time cognition and induced more past in front mappings. Maybe we more miss our golden days before the pandemic. People are becoming more missing their past. Okay, this is the first research I'd like to introduce to you, and the second one I want to talk about how the pandemic influenced our overconfidence bias. Okay, overconfidence bias refers to an egoistic belief in which people's subjective confidence in judgments and knowledge is reliably higher than their objectively reasonable performance and abilities. The vast majority of individuals, regardless of their ages, genders, races, and cultural backgrounds, demonstrate different degrees of overconfidence in many areas of professional and non-professional areas, including public health. For instance, some researchers found that individuals displaying a higher degree of over-optimism, one type of overconfidence, tend to underestimate the risk of COVID-19 pandemic and thus showed less compliance with preventive measures surrounding the pandemic. Existing research has shown that one salient health hazards can lead to a heightened perception of risk posed by other totally unrelated hazards. For instance, to test the possibility that everyday behaviors like sneezing in times of a flu pandemic may increase perception of unrelated risks. Lee and his colleagues stationed a Confederate on campus and asked her to simulate real-life experience by sneezing and coughing. The experimenter then instructed participants to complete a survey regarding the risk of contracting a heart attack or dying from a crime or accident. The results showed that participants who were exposed to a sneezing person estimated a higher likelihood of getting the serious disease or dying in an accident than did those in the control condition, even if these health concerns cannot possibly be directly linked to the flu pandemic, because we know that the flu did not cause the heart disease or car accident. Such findings suggest that human beings tend to rely on current feelings to assess risk, which allow emotion profiles associated with one threat to increase one's perceived risk of other unrelated threats. So, according to the risk compensation theory, humans tend to adjust their behaviors to dealing with different types of risks and to achieve maximum fitness benefits. On the one hand, people will act more carefully when they discern a higher level of risk for damage. For example, since Sweden switched from driving on the left-hand side of the road to the right-hand side in 1967, there were fewer car accidents and serious injuries. This is possibly because changing signs posed on an apparent risk on drivers. The increased degree of uncertainty caused them to show greater compliance with traffic laws and to use extra caution when driving. On the other hand, risk compensation can also be understood as the fact that people will engage more reckless and thrill-seeking behaviors when they feel less risk. For instance, Researchers found that religious priming related to a forgiving God can significantly increase participants' likelihood of committing unethical behavior, such as stealing more money. This pattern of results showed that individuals may act incautiously when they feel protected in a high-risk setting. So our hypothesis is, since the pandemic has heightened health concerns, coughing, a common symptom of the new coronavirus infection, may serve as an important reminder to the high risk of the coronavirus disease. According to risk compensation theory, humans become more cautious when they are at high risk and less cautious when at low risk. As shown above, this heightened perception of the risk can even generalize across domains. If this is the case, we would expect to say that a salient health threat, such as public coughing, in the context of COVID-19, would contribute to individual tendency to exhibit less confidence even in non-health domains. So we conducted our field experiment to directly test the prediction that public coughing would significantly weaken the strength of overconfidence bias in the peer comparison problem about self-evaluation getting a job among Chinese university students. So here is our overconfidence question. Imagine that there is a random sample of 100 university undergraduates who are of the same gender as you and entered the university the same year you did. Assume that you are one of these 100 students. Suppose all 100 students in the sample are ranked by the date they get a job. What is your best estimate of the number of students in the sample who gets hired earlier than you? According to previous research, if respondents on average were neither overconfident nor underconfident, their average position estimate among 100 peers should be at the middle point. A specific score is greater than the 50s should be considered as an indication of overplacement, while a score is below the 50s should denote underplacement. The higher the percentile rank indicated by the participants, the higher level of overconfidence they showed, and vice versa. Following prior work, we use the following equation to calculate the overconfidence bias. That is, the mean bias peer comparison equals mean percentile estimated minus 50%. According to the equation, a smaller number of individuals getting hired before the participants represents greater overconfidence. It is a typical cognitive bias in human minds, and a large number with less overconfidence. A large number indicates less overconfidence. So our results showed that in comparison to participants in the control condition, participants who had just walked by a coughing confederate estimated that more people would get a job before them. The main effect of gender was also significant, which indicates that the male participants in both coughing and control conditions showed greater overconfidence than their female counterparts. This is in line with previous findings in the literature. So, the COVID-19 is a new disease with multiple phases. The unfamiliarity of the threat may also heighten people's risk perception and overconfidence bias. For instance, some researchers showed that the perceived health hazards of ostensible food additives were rated as higher when they had a relative hard-to-pronounce name, respects to a relatively easy-to-pronounce name. In addition, the researchers identified that the perceived novelty of the substance mitigates its effects. Thus, when individuals experience an unfamiliar health threats such as COVID-19 2 years ago. Their overall fearfulness about virus may increase, which may make them more prone to avoiding overconfidence. Of course, we did not test the mediation mechanism uh, behind our observed effects. So this mechanism warrant future investigations. So about the practical implications of our research is that in the past few decades, much research has shown that numerous methods, including mastering two languages, that becoming bilinguals or recruiting more arguments and anticipating a group discussion, can uh, induce a reduction of overconfidence bias in our cognition. However, these methods usually need a long implementation period, such as if you want to learn a second language, if you want to receive some critical thinking skills trainings, it always needs a very long implementation period, which may limit their use in real life context. So the current investigation highlights the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic can reduce our overconfidence bias. This is as some countries like China have made significant progress in controlling the pandemic. People may show overconfidence in underestimating their likelihood of being infected and relax their COVID vigilance. Our research indicated that highlighting the magnitude of the risk from coronavirus is an important way to reduce overconfidence bias, even in domains unrelated to the pandemic. Okay, this is our talk. This is my talk. So we can say that in the past 2 years, we conducted several research to investigate the relationship between the pandemic and our cognition. We can see that the new coronavirus disease not only impact our all aspects of our life, it also shapes the way we think about the world. That's all for my talk. Thank you very much.